Hello, welcome to another edition of Prove All Things. I want to thank everyone who's joining us today, whether you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, or X, or in the CGI Digital Network app, whether that's on your phone, tablet, or television. We thank you for joining in live today. And to most of our audience who are listening to this, either recorded as a podcast or in our app, we thank you for joining us as well. I am joined with co-host Mike James. How you doing, Mike?
Hey, Jeff, good to see you today. We're just starting to get out of the 100-degree weather again here in California, and I'm happy for that, but just concerned for a lot of the folks down in Florida. Big storm coming through there. We got a church that's right in the path of that. So prayers go out if everybody can, remember to pray for the situation down there. They were just hit. We lost a feast site due to the last storm, and this one's coming right through again.
Yeah, we have another feast site in Auburndale, and that's taking the place of that feast site, and hopefully nothing happens there on the path of the storm. Really, like anything, we don't know. It's just we'll just have to watch and see what happens and pray for everyone, and and just see what happens. I guess
Right.
hopefully things will be better than what is expected. Because what I see, what is expected is pretty grim as far as what they've been saying on the forecast.
Yeah, definitely. They're really talking this storm up for sure.
Yeah.
And so folks, just keep that in mind. One programming note, Jeff, I wanted to make everybody aware of is we will be live next Tuesday, but we will not be around the following Tuesday due to the feast. So just keep that in mind for our regular participating audience out there.
All right. How was your Feast of Trumpets?
It was really good. I went to Kansas and Tonganoxie, Kansas, and a number of different groups came together there. It was a attendance of about 70 people, so that's pretty good for Church of God groups to have 70 people meeting in one place. Saw a lot of people I hadn't seen in a while, and really had a good time there talking with the folks afterwards.
Yeah, I had trumpets here in Atlanta, but this past weekend I was able to go visit our Montgomery, Alabama church, and it's always good for me to get out there and see them. That was almost my main church before I'd moved to Tyler. Years ago, I was going to Montgomery like twice a month, and so it's good now to be able to get there. Maybe once or twice a year to see.
Yeah, I've been down there a couple times. Nice group. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, standing by, we have our guest who is a new guest, and we'll go ahead and bring him in today. AJ Sanchez, how you doing, AJ?
Doing great. Glad to be here.
Hey, happy to have you, AJ. If you could tell the folks a little bit about yourself since you are a new guest, please.
Sure. My name's Abraham Joseph Sanchez. I grew up in western Idaho on a 100-acre farm. Right out of high school, I went to Ambassador College, graduated in 95. Over a period of time, I've kind of moved to a few different organizations, but I've always continued my studies, and I like to share it as much as I can. I've got a YouTube channel, My Hebrew Roots, and I was recently brought on as an editor for the Herald of Truth. We just recently had our 70th anniversary issue, so we're kind of excited about that. But I'm always looking for opportunities to speak and to share my knowledge. So I'm really glad to be here today. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Yeah. Hey, I found you through a mutual friend, and I was able to see some of your material that you have out there in video, and it was really inspiring, and I thought you did a really good job. So happy to have you today.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's really interesting. A lot of times you really dig in deep to some of these different topics, and there's always so much more to learn from the Word of God, and obviously being able to apply it. So I'm glad I can share from time to time.
All right, very, very good. So again, glad to have you with us today. So, what you have a topic prepared for us, and from what I just saw a little bit of it as we were getting ready yesterday, it looks very interesting.
Yeah, it's on the book of Daniel,
Mm-hmm.
and specifically the dating and the historical evidence for the traditional dating of Daniel.
Mm-hmm.
As many of us know, the book of Daniel is by far the most contested book of the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not because there's a lot of these historical inaccuracies or these linguistic evidence tells us something different, or there's questions about when it was canonized, or it conflicts with other books of what they say. The real reason it is so contested is because it has some very accurate and detailed prophecies in the book.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And whereas some of the other books, they're harder to decipher. There's a lot of symbolism there. The prophecies in Daniel are very straightforward,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of them have already been fulfilled.
Right.
Like the descriptions of the Greco-Macedonian Empire is a big one.
Mm-hmm.
The description of Alexander the Great, his fighting style. You know, he had a very interesting fighting style where he basically, with his phalanx, I believe was the type of soldiers that he used, had these really long spears. Well, it matches the fighting style shown in Daniel chapter 8, where they basically rammed their way through their opponents. And that's how he defeated the Persians. Also, it talks about how at the height of his strength, he died, and his empire didn't go to his son. He had no posterity, as it says. He had no son, but it was divided amongst his 4 generals. And as we know, this all happened. And then you've got the 70 weeks prophecy of Daniel chapter 9, where it very accurately predicts the coming of the Messiah at the beginning of his ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got the battles between the king of the north and the king of the south. As we know, half of that is history about the Seleucid and Ptolemy dynasties that fought against one another and all their interactions. A lot of that was very accurate.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got the big one is in Daniel chapter 8, verse 14, that the sanctuary or the sacrifice would be taken away after the abomination of desolation, and it was going to be trampled underfoot for 2,300 morning and evening sacrifices. So basically 1,500 days, which it was exactly as the Maccabees and other historians tell us.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got all these very incredibly detailed prophecies. They all happen exactly the way Daniel predicted it was.
Right.
And so the book is under a tremendous amount of attack from all these atheistic Bible scholars.
Well, I guess you talk about atheistic Bible scholars. Don't they have no other choice if they don't believe in God but to try to discredit everything that's in there?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And they're just trying to they call them Bible minimalists or Bible critics. And when we think of a Bible critic, we're kind of thinking like a movie critic or a food critic, where they'll go to a restaurant. It could be good, it could be bad, the movie, thumbs up, thumbs down, whatever. Well, you get that out of your head right now. They're only there to criticize the Bible. They're never there to add to the authority of Scripture or to agree with the authority of Scripture. So when you think of Bible critics, don't think of them as a movie critic or a food critic. They're completely different. And so they consistently attack the Bible. And, one of the big problems that I have is that they won't really tell you why, right? Because, like, for instance, if I was doing an archaeological dig and I found a coin and it had Alexander the Great's face on it, I would assume automatically that coin was made after he was born, right? Correct? It had to have been made after he's born. Well, that's what these guys are doing. But the thing is, this is a religious book, and it self testifies that this is prophetic. So you either say, I don't believe in predictive prophecy, or you do. They will never say that. They won't admit to it. Because if they did, if they said, I do not believe in the authority of the Bible, I don't believe in predictive prophecy, you wouldn't read their book, you wouldn't buy their book, and you wouldn't send your kids to their college or their university. And so that's why they won't admit it. And so they play all these games and they give you all these reasons and excuses why the book of Daniel is basically a fraud, but they won't tell you the truth, and that's the problem. And
are you going to show us some of their arguments, or are you just going to go into?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good. Because I'd be curious to know what their arguments are that Daniel has a later date. Do they have any evidence to back up those arguments, or is it only because they don't believe in divine revelation?
They just lie. I don't know what to tell you other differently, because you read their arguments and then you say, well, most of it's straw man arguments where they're taking the worst interpretation possible, or they're saying the Bible's saying something that it's not saying, clearly not saying, but they're saying the Bible's saying this, and then they're arguing against that. And we can go through a bunch of these examples, and then other times they just get caught with their hand in the cookie jar, and then they just change. It's a constantly moving goalpost where, okay, this argument isn't any good, so then I'll go to another one, and that's what we see a lot too. So
before you go any further, I've spent some time studying this specific subject. That's why I was really intrigued by what you had to say. And, I did it a number of years ago. And what threw me, Jeff, was that if you don't look at both sides' reasoning, you don't see the real problems that the liberal scholars have in what they're saying. So like AJ saying, if you went to college and you had a liberal theologian teaching a class on Daniel and you didn't know anything about it, you might believe what they're saying because they have that authority as a professor in the class. But when you go to the conservative commentaries and you look what the conservative scholars are saying and how they defend against what the liberal scholars are saying on the book of Daniel, to me, I'm trying to be fair here, but to me, the weight of evidence is just on our conservative side, what we would believe. The weight is just tremendous on that side. And that is a big deal because of the book of Daniel's importance with prophetic prophecy. To me, it's another proof of God that, if you're lying about this book, it's going to take people away from this truth that would reveal that, hey, there really is a God. How could he know what was to come unless God was telling him?
Yeah.
Well, don't think scholars also do that with other books of the Bible as well?
Oh yeah. I
think a lot of them kind of put Matthew and Mark like way out into the 70s or 80s.
Oh yeah, and we can do that. I'd love to go through the Gospels of Christ and another program and all the lies they talk about that, and it can all be refuted. But they play all these dirty tricks. They only give you a very select, narrow bit of information, and they only give you the information that backs up their point of view. And the problem is they dominate the narrative because all the college and universities have all bought onto this, and Christian universities as well. They have these professors that are atheists, and I'm like, what are you doing? You're a college set up to teach ministers, and they're learning this just basic garbage, and that you're teaching to them. Why would you do that? And I argue with them sometimes, but it's pretty bad. But another reason we know, and as we go through this, keep in mind, is if you had some really good arguments, why are you playing all these dirty tricks? If you had a really good reason for the book of Daniel being a fraud, which is what they're saying, it's a 2nd century fraud claiming to be a 6th century book. Okay, because the book self-testifies that Daniel wrote it. He says that in chapter 8, that he wrote it. So if you have all these good reasons, why are you playing all these dirty tricks? and we're going to see some of their dirty tricks. I mean, they just go on and on and on. One of the big ones, that the dirty trick they played forever, is they suppress the Dead Sea Scrolls. And that's a whole scandal within itself, is how they've suppressed the Dead Sea Scrolls. So
now, let me ask you a question. So the Dead Sea Scrolls, are there copies of Daniel and the Dead Sea Scrolls?
Yeah, there was 8 copies, 8 fragments. There was no full piece, but you can go online and you can read the Dead Sea Scrolls online.
Right.
And I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well, because it's interesting to read when you compare the Masoretic text, the King James Version versus the Dead Sea Scrolls, and you can see it's not saying what they're saying it's saying either.
Right.
So that's very interesting, and it tells you why they suppressed it. So they found them in 1946, and they didn't publish them till the 1990s. Okay, you know, it's over 40 years. So why was this tremendous delay? Well, the entire team of scholars that were working on this, a bunch of them from Harvard, if that tells you anything, Oxford, you know, Cambridge, all the places that minimize the Bible, they're filled with these Bible minimalists. They taught for years that the Bible had evolved. You know, whether we're talking about the New Testament, the Old Testament, it evolved, and it was, you know, the Hebrews were illiterate till the 10th century, which is another lie that they tell. But so they believed that the book of Bible slowly evolved, and people kept changing it. You know, it was this big pot of stew that everybody kept adding different ingredients to it. And so when the Dead Sea Scrolls pop up and they track with the Masoretic text really close, it blew all their theories. And so, like a lot of the fake news out there, they just had to shift their narrative, and now they didn't talk about certain things, but they kept the same ideas going.
Well, I had a question about the Dead Sea Scrolls. Do we have a date? Do we know when they were compiled?
So they range depending on which scroll you're looking at. But if you're talking about Daniel, and of course they try and do everything they can to make him be as pick a later date whenever possible. But with the older books of Daniel, it would be the late or the early 2nd century BC. Is when we assume, or I know, or if maybe the late 3rd century BC of when those scrolls were written. And the reason that that's important is because the Septuagint translation came out about that same time, right? And so if they state that the book of Daniel wasn't written till 164 BC, so the middle of the 2nd century, right? So first of all, how did it make its way into the Septuagint if it was canonized with Daniel, you know, before 164? Explain that one to me, right? And secondarily, how did the Essenes get a copy of it, and why did they keep? They had 8 copies of it, and why did they keep it with all the other books of the Bible if it was, once again, a 2nd century fraud claiming to be a 6th century book? Right?
Yeah. Hey, great point. And I remember seeing that in your video, and something that got me was when you look at their theory that, okay, it's written in the earlier part of the 100s BC. Well, the Roman Empire really hasn't come on the scene yet. Okay.
Right.
And so most would say the 4th empire is the Roman Empire in the book of Daniel. But again, you've got a problem there if it's only the 3rd empire is when that book was written according to them. I, of course, believe it was written in the 500s BC. But again, there are these big problems with that theory.
Yeah, and they use all these diversion tactics, and that's, once again, is if you have this conclusive evidence, why do you have to pull all these dirty tricks? Why do you have to delay the books? Why do you have to, you know, come up with all these arguments Why do you have to keep moving the goalposts? Oh, once you refute one document or one argument, then they have to always come up with another one all the time. And it's pretty ridiculous. One of the big evidences for the traditional dating of the book of Daniel is the linguistic evidence, the etymology, the word selection, because one of the big ways that languages change is when you have the international language, whatever it happens to be at the time. You always are pulling these loan words from the international language, whether it's French or Latin or, it's Greek, And so, like a lot of scholars have said, is that if the book of Daniel was written in the 2nd century BC, it would have been saturated with Greek loan words, right?
Right.
And when they go through the book of Daniel, first of all, Aramaic was the international language at the time. It was the lingua franca. So half of it's written in Aramaic. And not only that, it's a very old Aramaic. It's 400 years earlier. And it's loaded down with these old Persian words, right? Well, by the time you come to the 2nd century, Old Persian's a dead language, okay? And so how did the book of Daniel get all these old Persian loan words in it? And a good example of this, let me pull this up real quick because it's kind of interesting, is in chapter 1 of the book of Daniel. Let me pull this slide up real quick. Right here. And this is where the king, had brought, we're talking about Nebuchadnezzar here. He had brought in all these people from all these different nations, and especially young men, to try and learn their culture and add. And he spoke to Aspenaz, the master of his officers, that he should bring some of the children of Israel of the king's seed and of the nobles. Well, all your translations across the board assume Aspenaz was the personal name of this master of his officers, right? Well, that's not correct. Aspenaz is actually an old Persian word, and it means innkeeper. And until 20th century archaeology, people didn't know what the word Aspenaz meant, right? Well, now we know. And so once again, how did this writer of the book of Daniel know Old Persian in the 2nd century BC?
So what you're saying is some of our translations now that make it a name, they because they were missing that information.
Right. Well, they just wrote the word in there. They put a capital on it, but they assume it is. But nobody knows what the word means. So we do that, like with words like Azazel. We don't know what Azazel means, so we just write Azazel in the scripture. And there's several places this is done where the translators rightly don't know what the word means,
right?
So they just don't translate it. And that's what's done with Aspenaz. It was assumed it was his personal name, but it's not. It actually means innkeeper.
Wow.
And another very interesting one is the Septuagint. So the Septuagint, if you read it, it's the same way. It has Aspenaz. It just spells out Aspenaz right there in the Greek, because they didn't know how to translate it either. It's a dead language in the 2nd century BC. So once again, how did this fake author of the book of Daniel, who wrote it in the 2nd century, he knew Old Persian, but the 70 translators of the Septuagint didn't? I mean, explain that one to me. Right. So you have all these questions, and they don't even address them anymore.
So now, you mentioned, what is our source now for knowing what Old Persian is? What is the new source?
Tablets.
The cuneiform tablets, okay.
Cuneiform tablets, the Assyrian Babylonian tablets. I got. You can download the book. It's really hard to read. It's a bunch of lines and stuff.
So when were those translated? When were those translated? And when did we learn that?
1850s.
1850s. Wow.
Yeah.
Hey, to your point, AJ, I just had one little note here on the language stuff. The tendency of the Aramaic in Daniel is to defer the verb to the end of the clause. The Aramaic in the Maccabean period did not do that. So that's another bit of evidence that when we come down to the 160s BC, the Aramaic at that time is doing something different with the verb than
Correct.
what the Aramaic of the 500s BC was doing. Again, another little bit of evidence that would lead you to believe Daniel was written back then rather than in the 160s.
Correct. Yeah.
Hey, could you clarify? Somebody has a question here. The question says, I'm under the impression that the Old Testament was written in Hebrew. Where does Greek fit into this? So yeah, I guess you maybe were mentioning the Septuagint, right?
Oh, so by the time you came to the 2nd century BC, 3rd century BC, because Greek was the international language of the time, a lot of people who, even Hebrews, didn't know Hebrew. They only knew Aramaic, and Aramaic's very close, but some of them didn't even know Aramaic, and so a Greek translation of the Bible became very popular. And when I say Old Testament, I'm talking about the Old Testament, the Tanakh. And so it would just be like, we have an English translation. I can't read Hebrew, so I have an English translation. And so that was just a translation of the Holy Scriptures for the Hebrews around the 2nd century.
Yeah. We don't have the oldest manuscripts. We don't have them in Hebrew, right? I mean, some of the Septuagint is an old translation of the Old Testament,
right?
But I don't know that we've got a Hebrew translation from that particular time. AJ, do you know, like, the oldest Hebrew translation of the Old Testament?
The Old Testament was originally written in Hebrew. It wouldn't need to be translated. The oldest manuscripts, I think, go to 1000 AD. And it's referred to as the Masoretic text.
Right.
Yeah, so but wouldn't the Dead Sea Scrolls be earlier, though? A lot earlier. And were they in Hebrew?
They were. They are a lot earlier. And the Isaiah scroll, the Great Isaiah scroll, and I can show you a copy. I've got a copy of it here. It's a big file.
Yeah, you talking about that's in the Dead Sea Scroll. I think I saw an exhibition of Dead Sea Scrolls, and that was like the highlight of the whole exhibition was that scroll.
And the thing that's very impressive about it is it tracks with the Masoretic text 99.9% of the time. The only differences are in spelling mistakes, and there's like a half a dozen words that the spelling mistake might give you another word, but there's no reason to believe that the book of Isaiah was copied any differently than any other books. And so I think it's important, if I could just take a second to talk about how if we have time, of how Bibles were copied, and not to be confused when these Bible minimalists try and say that, there's all these variations. So when a scribe was trying to copy the Bible, it was on pages, and they would stitch them together in a roll, and they would count every column and every line and every page. And if they were off at all, then they would throw the whole page away, and they'd have to start over. And then when they were done, they would take this old copy, because it was kind of falling apart, and they wanted to get a new copy. It's written on parchment, which is animal hides. And then they would burn the old copy, right? And you're wondering, this thing's worth like $100,000. This is basically a Lamborghini they're lighting on fire. And so you're asking yourself, well, why would they do that? Well, they did it because they didn't want these copies of the scriptures laying around that were way past their expiration date. Because what would happen is someone would get a private individual would get a copy of the scriptures, and then he would keep it way past the expiration date. And then when he sees the thing starting to fall apart and crumble, and there's words, the ink would delaminate and come off, he'd go, "Hey, I heard Bubba and Cletus, they know how to translate, they know how to write on parchment. We need to get them over here and make a copy." Not to talk bad about Bubba, any listeners, his name might be Bubba or Cletus, but you get the point. And so they would have their buddies make a copy of it, and then you'd have this fresh copy of this really bad manuscripts. Well, when it would come to words that were either they couldn't read them or they had completely fallen off and crumbled, then they would just fill in the blank, right? And so now you have this brand new copy of the scriptures that has all these errors in it, right? And this would happen all the time, and that's why they would burn the old copies. Well, when you look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, the scriptures of the Dead Sea Scrolls, they have all the telltale signs of just that. A private copy that was kept for too long, and somebody made copies of it and filled in the blanks. And you can look over here. I'm going to pull this up real quick. You can look at the Dead Sea Scrolls online, and every time you see a color here, it shows a word that was misspelled is in the green. And then if you go to the red, they show words that were completely different. The crossed out is the original King James that was different, and then they have the new word in there. Well, this reads just like a Cletus and Bubba job, where they just filled in the blank.
Right.
What they try and tell you is the scriptures evolved, and we don't see that. We don't see this evolution of the scriptures where they rewrote a paragraph or they reworded a section, like you would have a rough draft and a second draft and a third draft. That's not what we see. We see a fill in the blank, kind of like the old Mad Libs game where you fill in the words, and because there were certain words missing, but the whole thing tracks exactly like the scriptures.
Wasn't that one of the big discoveries of the Dead Sea Scrolls, AJ? The fact that the oldest manuscripts we had from, in AD 900 or whatever AD, they were so close to this now older manuscript that you have within the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's just little words here or there, no major differences.
Exactly.
Kind of blew some of those liberal scholars' theories away, right?
It did for a very short period of time, and then they just changed the narrative. They shifted the narrative, and then they just counted the variations. And there was. Well, if you read in the Revised Version, the introduction of the Revised Version, or the New Revised Version, or any of these newer translations, they'll say, "Oh, the King James Version had these gross errors in it," and maybe compared to some private manuscript that we don't know where it came from and who had it and how they copied it. Sure, you could say there's differences there, but I still don't trust them. Is it better to have a copy that was handwritten from last week by memory, or a photocopy from 10 years ago? Obviously, the method of transferring the information is more important than the age. But these are the arguments they like to make. And they don't tell you this stuff because they're playing these games on.
Yeah, the one thing that got me about the Dead Sea Scrolls, especially when you mentioned the Isaiah scroll, is that you have the suffering servant prophecy in there, which foretells all these details about Jesus's crucifixion, and they can't deny the date of that.
Yeah,
They can't deny that predates Christ. And I love that. There's no way they can wiggle around that.
Yeah. And the Isaiah scroll is one of the ones where they must have got somehow, and I don't know how they did it, they got a hold of an official copy, because it is, like I said, it's one of the best ones, and it tracks 99% of the time, 99.9% of the time with the Masoretic text, which is where we get our Old Testament from. And so the question is, why would Isaiah had been copied any differently than all the rest of the books of the Old Testament? It wouldn't be. So that once you make those arguments, then they just shift it to something else. It's a constantly moving goalpost. Oh no, this is more important. This is most important now. The historical errors and we can talk about another argument that they give about Daniel specifically is the Greek words in the book of Daniel. And so in, I think it's in chapter 3, when Nebuchadnezzar makes this big image, and he tells everybody needs to bow down to this image when they hear the sound of the harp, the lyre, the bag, the sackbut, or there's all these words that the zither, the lyre, depending on Daniel chapter 3, excuse me.
Yeah.
And they mention all these musical instruments. Well, those are actually 3 of those words there. They're actually Greek words.
Okay.
And so then that's where they say, that's the smoking gun right there. They're using all these Greek words because this was written during the period after the time of Alexander the Great, where Greek was the international language. And that's one of the arguments they tried to give. Well, later on, it was found and determined that Greece had exported musical instruments. They had been exporting them for quite some time. And also there was a relief found in the palace of Ashur-shirpal II. And here they had found all of these Greek musical instruments mounted on the wall. And this is an example. This is in the temple of Ashur-shirpal. This is an Assyrian temple dated 200 years before Daniel. And those are Greek musical instruments that both those guys are packing right there. And
so this would be in the 700s BC. They're dating this relief.
Right.
Okay.
And so the bottom line is that Greece had exported musical instruments for quite some time, and that's why Daniel uses these Greek musical instruments. Well, this only reinforces the dating for Daniel because those are the only Greek words in there, right?
Yeah.
And so now they won't talk. So now they won't talk about it. Oh, let's not talk about etymology anymore. That they keep changing their arguments. And it gets comical after a while, but that's the rumor. And I want to read you this quote from John C. Wilcomb, and this is what he states in his book on Daniel. He says, the book of Daniel would have been saturated with Greek terms if it were written as late as 167 BC in Palestine, where Greek-speaking Hellenistic governments had controlled the empire and the region for more than 160 years. Instead of this, we find just 2 or 3 technical terms obviously referring to foreign cultural objects. Thus, critical objections deeply rooted in anti-supernaturalistic presuppositions turn out to be a provisional means for displaying all the more brilliantly the authenticity and genuineness of the book of Daniel as a 6th century BC document. And so he explains it quite well in his book. And now
what's the name of that book again? And the author, in case people want to get that.
It's John C. Whitcomb, and his book is just called Daniel. That's what it's called. So, but now once again, you have this scenario where they just don't talk about etymology or linguistics anymore, because it's very obvious that all the etymology matches the 6th
So if they're not talking about that, what is now currently in colleges? If someone goes there, what are they teaching? What are their best arguments?
The big one they use is the illusion of consensus. All the experts believe that Daniel was written. So, and they just list all the experts. And if you look at some of their explanations, if you look on Wikipedia, which I call Libropedia, they all they do is quote other experts. They won't actually give you the evidence. Encyclopedia Britannica is one of the best because they'll at least tell you the reasoning behind it. And I got a good example right here. I have a copy of this. I don't know why I bought it. I originally thought the Encyclopedia Britannica would be a good source for learning about the Bible, but it's all minimalistic, critical Bible scholar trash. But it's good. At least they give the arguments. In fine, the interpolation of median Darius Darius must be regarded as the most glaring historical inaccuracy of the author of Daniel. In fact, this error of the author alone is proof positive that he must have lived at a very late period when the record of the most of the earlier historical events had become hopelessly confused and perverted. So what's he talking about? He's got a whole chapter on here if you want to read where he's talking about this, and this is his summary. So he gives several reasons why Darius Mede is one of the most glaring historical accuracies. First of all, history tells us that Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon in 539 BC, not Darius the Mede. And secondarily, it refers to him as the king of the empire. Well, this is just a straw man's argument because the Bible doesn't say that. For instance, all it says is that Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. It doesn't say he conquered Babylon. It just says he received the kingdom. So we know from history that Cyrus the Great.
Hey, AJ, can I read? I'm going to read what it actually says in Daniel 5, verse 30 and 31. I don't know, Jeff, if you can bring it up or not, but just to AJ's point, like what is the Bible really saying? And it says, Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, was slain, and Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So that's very limited information. It says this guy took the king. What does that mean? Okay.
Right. And other translations say received, as well, meaning, once again, it's a very open-ended term. We don't know what it means, but to use that as your example of how historically inaccurate, well, it's a straw man argument. They're arguing against a position the Bible isn't taking. And then in Daniel chapter 10 and verse 1, it states clearly that Cyrus was king of the Persian Empire, right? And then over in Daniel 9, verse 1, it states that Darius was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans, right? Didn't say he conquered the whole area. Didn't say that he was king of the Persian Empire. And that's what they're saying, is that Darius the Mede was the emperor, because there's Darius the Great, and then there were several other Dariuses in the Persian government. But Darius the Mede was never king, or never was emperor during the time of Daniel. Well, the Bible isn't saying that. And to say that there's no other person that lived in Persia called Darius, I mean, that's just ridiculous. There could easily be other people with that name,
right? And one of the things I read, AJ, was that Cyrus probably put a Mede in charge while he went out on another campaign, and the Medes and Persians kind of enveloped each other at this time anyway. The name Darius can simply mean royal one. Sometimes honorifics or titles are used in the Middle East. So again, there's a lot of scholarly information on the opposite side to explain this that maybe the Encyclopedia Britannica article doesn't give that, though.
Oh yeah, it's well, and the word there's melech that's used for king, and it can be ruler. It can mean ruler. It can mean prince. I mean, it just means you were in charge of something. That's all the word means. And so what they do is they cherry pick the translation they want to use, and then they argue against that. Well, I mean, that's classic straw man strategy, where you're arguing against a position that the other guy isn't even taking. And they're saying that is their proof positive right there, So if that's their all-encompassing, all-important argument, and it doesn't even come close to being legit, what else do they have? I mean, how long do we keep going? We can keep going because I want to give a bunch more examples, but they're all about that retarded is they
so
just
that's one of their stronger arguments, AJ.
yeah. Well, the Greek words was initially their strong argument, and then it was Darius, and another one that they give is talking about Belshazzar. So in Daniel chapter, I think it's Daniel chapter 7. It mentions that Nebuchadnezzar was Belshazzar's father, and he was his son, right? And it also states that he was king. Well, once again, in the Aramaic, the words here being used is ab and bar. Okay, there's no strict usage for ab and bar. The Jews often referred to Abraham as their father and them as their son. We're sons of Abraham. It just means descendant, and it can also just mean ancestor. So the word ab and bar doesn't necessarily have to be used in the strictest literalist sense.
So it could mean not just son, maybe it could be grandson or great grandson. Okay.
And here's what they say about this. Daniel could not, and this is once again the Encyclopedia Britannica, Daniel could not have originated at the time of Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel thought that Belshazzar was the son of Nebuchadnezzar, and that Belshazzar had attained the rank of king, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where in reality he was the grandson, and he wasn't actually the king. He was a co-regent, right? And so once again, the word Melech there doesn't have to mean king. It just means ruler.
Right.
And the word ab and bar don't have to be used. They aren't strictly used as father and son. They can mean ancestor or descendant.
Right.
And so once again, they're arguing against positions the Bible isn't even taking. They're cherry picking the translation they want to use, and then they're arguing against it. And once again,
they're creating a problem, and their solution is to tell you that the Bible's is not inspired.
Yeah, that's what they're going with. And
was there also sometimes I've read in ancient times where a son would be ruling at the same time that the father was, due to just the age and things like that of the original ruler, that you sometimes had two guys ruling at the same times?
Oh yeah, definitely. It was co-regent, but in this situation, so Nabonidus was Belshazzar's father. Okay, Nabonidus wasn't Nebuchadnezzar's son. He was his son-in-law. And so he didn't have a son. Nebuchadnezzar didn't have a son. He had daughters. And so what he did is his daughter married Nabonidus, which is one of his generals. And so he was supposed to be training Belshazzar to be the king, right? His grandson, so he could keep it in the family. He wanted to keep the empire in the family. And he basically raised Belshazzar as his son, his grandson, and prepared him for the throne. Well, he died, and so Nabonidus continued to be the king, and he was a co-regent with his son. And he was gone a lot because he had health problems. And that's why in the book of Daniel, whoever was able to decipher the handwriting on the wall would be a third ruler in the kingdom. Because he couldn't give him the number 2 spot, because he was the number 2 spot, right? And so Nabonidus was the first, he was the second, and whoever was able to translate the handwriting on the wall would be the third. And so once again, we see very clearly that the author of the book of Daniel, which was he himself, understood this because he was an eyewitness to these events, and it all matches up. But once again, they won't tell you this stuff because they have a bent and a bias against the scripture. And they will not accept predictive prophecy. That's the reason.
Let me ask you, so we're coming upon the end of the hour. What is the best argument for those out there that of Daniel's age and authentic, that it's authentic? What would be the best argument you have to tell people, that this is, truly written before the fact? What would you say would be the best argument for that?
I would say the one, there's basically two arguments. One, it was part of the 22 books of the Tanakh.
Okay.
There's 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. There's 22 books in the Hebrew alphabet, and they had them all bases. And this is at the time of Ezra, and so this is in the 450s, 425 BC. Ezra had canonized Daniel as one of those 22 books. So that's a big argument for me. And then second, and this precedes Alexander the Great, right? And then the second one would be the linguistic evidence, the fact that it would be nearly impossible. I couldn't write you a paragraph without using Latin or French or some other Greek loan words. Our language is saturated with it. It would be impossible to do that. And yet Daniel does it. There's no Greek loan words. It would have been saturated with it. So for me, that's another big proof. And then the fact that it's in the Septuagint. The Jews knew it was wasn't created in the 2nd century, and they added it at that time.
Yeah, I think that those are some great points. We got to remember Hellenism began around 300 BC, and they're saying that this book was written 160s BC. So that's a lot of time where Greek thought and writing has already permeated the kingdom.
Right, and at that time, most Jews didn't know Hebrew; they knew Greek. And that's why the Septuagint was so popular. So, and then the other point you made is the VSO worder. They weren't using that in Aramaic anymore. They had swapped the VSO, verb, object, and subject. They switched it around like English is at the time of the Maccabees. So there's so many reasons. I would just my advice to these listeners is assume. If they're atheists, they're lying to you because they don't like morality, because that's why they're there in the first place. And two is just break down their arguments. Don't trust anybody. Don't take anybody's word for it. Read and find their actual arguments and break them down in the first grade English, and then you'll see, well, this is just a joke. And it takes a little bit of time, but it's a very interesting study.
Have you looked into the apocryphal additions to Daniel to know when they were dated or anything, or is there reasons to show why those are definitely false? Well, this is real.
Well, I've done seminars on this topic before, not necessarily on the apocryphal books, but on the fact of how the Bible was canonized.
Right.
And once again, you got 22 books. And to match the 22 letters of the Hebrew language, it's complete. It's like you got 10 fingers. You can't add an extra one in there. You can't add 11th finger, right? We couldn't add 11th, a 23rd letter to the alphabet. And they were never in the original canon, and they were never considered scripture. Keep in mind, the Essenes were a sect, a private sect of the Jews, and that's why they moved off into the desert, so they could, read and interpret these apocryphal books. And we don't have any example of the Christ or the apostles quoting them, except for the Book of Enoch, right? And here's the big question about the Book of Enoch: was Jude written before or after the Book of Enoch? Because we don't have anybody else referring to the Book of Enoch until after the Book of Jude. And that first line is straight out of the Book of Jude, and then after that you read the writing style and it's completely different. So I do not believe that. I believe the Book of Jude was written before the Book of Enoch in that case.
I specifically referring to the apocryphal additions to Daniel, because there are parts of Daniel
like Bell and the Dragon.
Bell and the Dragon.
and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Is there ways to say, hey, that right there, that specific part of Daniel is not part of Daniel, or how
I haven't really studied it
you
that
haven't looked
much.
into that? Okay, I'm just
I know
curious
there are
about that.
fragments that are found within the Quran. They were in the same sections of the library with the scriptures, but once again, these were Essene sects, and that's the reason they had moved out of Jerusalem, is so they could study these books in their library. But they were never accepted by the Jews, obviously, of Jerusalem, the Pharisees or the Sadducees or any of the other political parties. So
now we got a comment from William Blank about Daniel 7:29, but I'm looking in my King James right now. I'm not seeing a 29th verse in Daniel 7, William. So if you could check on that, where you're getting that. I got 28 verses in Daniel 7 in my Bible, but we'll take it once you bring it back. But AJ, we got about 5 minutes left. What do you want to conclude for the listeners today? What are some takeaways that you want them to have?
Well, I would, and it's mainly a warning I would give to young people, because this is a big problem. They go off to these college and universities. They're bright-eyed. They're wanting to learn. They listen to these professors where we're talking about, evolution, or we're talking about these critical Bible scholars, or even these biologists. And if I can come back on another program, I can touch any of these topics, and they overwhelmingly are dishonest with the information that they give out, and they don't give any other arguments. During COVID, I was sitting with my son. He had to take all his college classes online, and I was listening to him, and it was so infuriating to see them twist and misrepresent the truth and the stuff they left out. And so I would just warn our young people, if you're reading online and you're reading individuals who are regurgitating all this Bible criticism, to critically analyze it. Don't take these guys' word for it. Do your own research, because overwhelmingly they chose a lifestyle, and then they've decided to become atheists because of it, to justify what they were already doing. And there's a lot of critical Bible scholars and anthropologists who, Margaret Mead, for instance, who is talking about the Samoan people, and they all have adulteries, and they don't have any problems with it, and it's a great place, and we need to be more open like they do. Well, she was having an affair during the very time she was doing her research,
Yeah.
And so this happens time and time again, where they want to justify what they're already doing. So just critically analyze what you're reading, check up on it. International Bible Encyclopedia is a great commentary, and I would definitely use it over some of these others, because it gives you the other side to the story.
Is that available online?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And also, you've done like some on your YouTube channel? You've done some presentations, I guess, on this topic.
Correct. Yes,
And
I have.
they can go watch that on your YouTube for more information about that. All right, this has been a very, very interesting topic today. I being a person of faith, haven't really thought about it much, because, I believe Daniel's part of the Bible. I believe it's true. But again, there's those people, when you have people who are maybe just learning or coming into the faith, and again, so many people I've known who've been part of God's church who have left because they get fooled by some of these arguments, and go down, the atheistic road. And I think, you mentioned they teach a lot of this in seminary, and they have atheist professors. I think from what I read, there's a lot of people in just the mainstream Christianity, pastors and teachers, that are atheists, actually, that they learn, and they just it's a profession to them.
It's a job for them, that's what they were taught in college. I got to keep going with it. I got a job. I got to pay the bills.
Yeah.
And then you read their stuff, and you realize they're regurgitating all this minimalist Bible criticism, and you realize pretty quick these guys don't even believe in God. And it's a shame, because a lot of young people, they have their faith broken by these charlatans and con artists, and they're not honest, and that's the big problem.
Yeah, great stuff today. And what you said about Margaret Mead, if you read some of the early evolutionary theorists and what they were into, it'll hit right with what you were saying about people have an agenda sometimes when they are promoting a certain viewpoint. I have to admit, I have an agenda too, but I try to be honest about it. And what really hit me, AJ, was when I looked at this subject, I did look at what the liberals were saying. I did look at what the conservatives were saying. Mm-hmm. And the argument on the conservative side just completely beat the liberal arguments.
Mm-hmm. Well, the tactic they use, they control the dialogue. And so you don't even they don't even pose those other arguments. This Yale University professor, she was talking about the Noachian flood, and she was leaving everything out and just had this narrow view. And sure, if that's all the information you had, I guess it sounds okay. The Noachian flood was just copied from all the other, people in Mesopotamia. But you get the full picture. Well, then you realize, well, no, this is ridiculous. But they don't give you that information. They have to play all these dirty tricks.
They make the students feel bad if they want to pursue the truth. That that's a wrong answer. That is not the way we think of it in these scholarly circles and stuff.
Hey, more support for AJ. I just wanted to. William did come back with, it was in Daniel 5:29.
Okay.
And if you read his earlier comment there, what it was saying is Belshazzar made Daniel the third ruler of the kingdom. So the argument here is there were various regents and vice regents, and so that argument about what was it, Nabonidus or Darius, the name Darius, he could have been just another leader under the main leader who was Cyrus.
Exactly. Yeah. And they're cherry picking the translation they want to argue against. Classic straw man.
Right.
Gotcha. Hey, great stuff, AJ. I want to thank you. We're going to bring you back. If you could hang in after we end, I'll try to get you on a calendar date. Okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Again, thank you, AJ, for joining us today. Very eye-opening, good information, and we thank everybody who's been with us live and for your comments. And we'll see everybody again next week on another edition of Prove All Things. So goodbye, everyone.